All right, this is the class activity for identifying chemical bonds. So the purpose of this activity is to practice identifying different types of chemical bonds. So there are some references here. Of course, there is this video. There's also some video on ionic bonding and naming covalent molecules. And of course, there is this periodic table. So the first part, let's look at the following substance and determine the type of chemical bond, then write the compound name. The squares won't turn green until the entire row is correct. So let's just do a couple of them, right? So I give you a little hint here. Ionic bonds are formed between metals and nonmetals. Covalent bonds are formed between nonmetals and nonmetals only, and metallic bonds are formed between metals only. When naming ionic compounds, name the cation first, then the nonmetal ion, element stem, and add the "ide." So we'll go over some of that. When naming covalent compounds, the number of each atom will need to be taken into consideration. So we'll go over some examples of that. But essentially, if you look at this periodic table, there's this little staircase right here, this bold staircase. Everything to the left of it is a metal. Everything to the right of it is a nonmetal. And hydrogen is also a nonmetal. And there are some metalloids in there, but that really doesn't come into play here. So let's just go ahead and do the first one, right? So I've got NaCl. So sodium is number 11, right? So it's a metal. And Cl, that's chlorine. That is number 17 over here. It's a nonmetal. So it's a metal and a nonmetal. And the bond type is going to be ionic because between a metal and a nonmetal, it's going to be ionic. Now, when I'm writing it, it's going to be sodium and then chloride, right? So remember that last one. So you just write the first, you just write the positive cation, and then for the anion, you drop the ending and add "ide." Okay, so let's do another one here, right? Let's do the second one. So carbon and oxygen. So I look up here, carbon is number 6, oxygen is number 8. Those are between two nonmetals. So this is going to be a covalent bond. So now this one is going to be, well, I only have one carbon, so it's going to be carbon. And then now I'm going to have to take into account how many of each of these atoms I have. So I've got 2 oxygens, so it's going to be dioxide, right? So same principle with dropping the last part and adding "ide, but I do have to take into account how many, and I only have to do that for covalent bonds. Now let's just go down to number 5, right? Fe, that is iron. That's just a metal only, and that's a metallic bond. And then all I have to do is just write iron, right? That's really all it is, right? So remember those metals, if it's just a metal, like they share electrons. It's like a sea of electrons. So now let's go down here, right? So now I'm giving you the substance and you have to write that compound formula. Ionic bonds are formed between metals and nonmetals. Covalent bonds are formed between nonmetals. Same thing is up there. Now, in writing the formula for ionic compounds, the number of each element will need to be found. When writing the formula for covalent compounds, the number of each element is implied by the prefixes. So let's just go ahead and do that first one. Let's do aluminum chloride. So I look at aluminum. Aluminum's right here. It's a metal. Chlorine is a nonmetal. So it's a metal and a nonmetal. So that means it's going to be ionic. So what that means is that I need to figure out what each charge of these has to figure out how many. And I can use the crisscross method to figure that out. So aluminum is going to have a charge of, it's going to have a positive 3 charge, and chlorine is going to have a -1 charge. So you need to figure that through those ionic because aluminum is going to lose 3 electrons. Chlorine's going to gain 1. So in order to do that, I'm going to need 3 chlorines. So it's going to be Al. I only need 1 aluminum, but I'm going to Cl3. I'm going to need 3 of those chlorines, 3 of those negative charges to make up for aluminum's 1 positive charge. Let's do number 2, titanium. Well, it's just a metal, right? It's just going to be a metallic bond, and then all I need to do is just write Ti, right? It's just titanium. That's all it is, right? Remember, it's just those sharing those sea of electrons. So let's do one. How about this one? Number 15, dihydrogen monoxide. So just looking at that, Hydrogen is a nonmetal, so is oxygen. It's a nonmetal, so it's going to be nonmetals only, meaning it will be a covalent bond. So dihydrogen, so that means I have two hydrogens, monoxide, right? That is one oxygen, and I don't need to write the one. It's H2O. That is water. So those are the different examples that you can have. This bottom part's a little trickier because you have to determine whether it's ionic, covalent, or metallic. And then if it's ionic, you do have to determine what each, how many of each you have by the charges. So once again, this is that class activity, identifying chemical bonds.